Tonight, the United Health Foundation has released America's health rankings for 2023, with Kentucky staggering behind most other states. Some of the criteria include things like physical health and economic resources. WKYT's Alyssa Williams checking in with a Kentucky family doctor to learn more about what we can do to improve our health.
Following the release of America's health rankings from the United Health Foundation, Kentucky ranks 41st in the nation for a wide range of physical, mental, and other forms of health.
Well, I'd say some of the findings aren't surprising, especially given one of the things is obesity.
Family physician Dr. Jeff Fox says the study's findings that Kentucky has a high prevalence of multiple chronic conditions could be linked to obesity.
Obesity specifically can lead to diabetes. Diabetes in itself comes with multiple problems, can affect your vision, can affect your heart, can affect your kidneys, can affect your circulation in general.
The study also shares that Kentucky has a high occupational fatality rate.
Well, there are a couple of things there. One is black lung. Now, that's not nearly as prominent as it once was, and we're not seeing nearly as much of that, but we are in Kentucky have a higher incidence of that. And because of the coal mines, there's occupational injuries, which can lead to change in health status.
Dr. Fox adds that along with not smoking, there are several things we can implement in our daily lives to improve overall health.
First, start with diet. Don't drink a lot of your calories. Instead of drinking a regular Coke, drink a Diet Coke, or even better, drink water. Pick low-calorie, healthy type foods if possible. Instead of taking the elevator, walk up the stairs. There's simple things that you can do overall to make yourself healthier that don't require a lot of work, but do require some thought.
Alyssa Williams, WKYT.
Dr. Fox says another issue he's seen in his practice is misinformation. He says that often leads to low vaccination rates and avoiding other measures that can prevent illness or even death.